revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? Lit. The revolution is lit.
For the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is highly important, and we encourage you right now to share this stream, invite your friends and family to it so that as many of our people can be involved in this discussion. This week, the chairman continues with Vanguard Up, Unity of Theory and Practice, the political report to the first 7th Congress plenary of the African People's Socialist Party, resuming from the section, Imperialism in Crisis Creates Conditions to Advance the Revolution, on page 44. In this study, the chairman will speak about imperialism in crisis, expound on what that looks like, and reveal how during this period, our task as revolutionary organizers is critical. We have to, now more than ever, take this responsibility of advancing the revolution seriously, to commit to it fully, putting the party's nearly 50 years of organizing practices to work. This understanding, plus the development of our regional strategy, is what led to the appointment of a director of organization, which will also be discussed in this study. What does having an office of the director of organization promise for our party? We will also discuss the most important task of our party at this moment, which is the task of recruitment into all our areas of work. This is a main objective for the regional hub strategy for the appointment of a director of organization. We've established recruiting practices that work when they are effectively implemented, and the tool that serves as a constant refresher is none other than our party organizational manual. In our party, we are guided by theory and exercise high discipline. There must be tactics and strategies applied to everything we do. This is one reason our manuals exist, our protocols exist, so that we can continue to put the theory of African internationalism into practice, so that we can exercise the discipline and required of the advanced attachment of the African working class. These are all points that will be tackled during this study. It is an honor to be able to study this document, which serves as a blueprint for making a revolution with not just the author himself, but the leader of the African People's Socialist Party, the African internationalist strategist, our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru.
Uhuru. First of all, I want to thank you, Comrade Director Adjunct Prop Akilia Nai, for that introduction. And I want to call on those of you who are participating in the studies this morning to be prepared to go, if necessary, to go to Burning Spear TV on YouTube. During last Sunday, most of you would have noticed if you were on Facebook that the moment I mentioned the coronavirus and and its basis that Facebook shut us down. And then beyond that, there was an occasion where another member of our party doing work around the coronavirus issue was flagged on Facebook. While he was speaking, Facebook put up a flag saying this is false news, and then told the people what they should really believe in terms of pointing to sites that approved, government Facebook approved sites that explains coronavirus, where it came from and what it means. So this is the kind of thing that we're confronted with now, and that's why I want to say now, first of all, we can't rely on any of these entities, any of these platforms that we are working with. That's why getting out in our community, selling this newspaper is such a crucial thing for us. The Burning Spear newspaper is going to continue to be the most reliable, consistent instrument that we have for organizing the people for production and distribution of ideas. So that's something you should be quite conscious of, quite aware of. You should also look out for the information, as much news and information as you can get on this coronavirus issue. It is a crucial question that's affecting people all around the world. Up until recently, we assumed that not much was happening with coronavirus in places like Africa, but we see now that from reports from our comrades in what they call South Africa or occupied Azania, that there's an escalating issue of coronavirus there. And it is apparently up to now been a coronavirus that has been brought to what they call South Africa from Europe or from the United States. It's been usually someone from Europe or from the United States that's brought it there, but it's really beginning to impact the people in a much more serious way. In the last period, in the last several days, we inside the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement have been preoccupied with establishing immediate and emergency type protocols to deal with the coronavirus issue. Much of this revolves around our institutions, around the various businesses that's owned by our movement, the organizing centers that we have, but we have begun, as I said, to initiate immediate emergency kinds of protocols. And we're doing this as we continue to work to develop a more consistent, better defined response to this coronavirus issue. So you should be aware of that. And you should be there on Burning Spear News. I think there is something that was done recently by APDEP, the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. Comrade Sister Aisha Fields did put something forward, giving advice about how to deal with coronavirus. The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations, Comrade's Sister Lisa Davis, who is the vice chair of that organization, has done some incredibly important work. She has collected information from a variety of sources, and she is currently developing an official response from the coalition to this issue. Within the last couple of days, I thought an incredibly significant, powerful webinar was done by Uhuru Solidarity Movement, comrades Jesse Neville and Penny Hess, that you will find extremely informative, and also it deals with the political issues surrounding the arrival of coronavirus. And these are some of the things you should look at. Within the next several weeks, we will see more happening from our movement, from the party, from the Uhuru movement in general, and specifically also from the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. Some things have changed that I should mention to you moving forward. Before that, I want to say this about the censorship. There's a growing censorship that's happening, And the coronavirus is something that escalates this crisis of imperialism and what have you. And what you'll see is that the system gets extremely dangerous, and many of the things that it has boasted of in the past when it had no real contenders for power, about freedom of speech and et cetera, they don't brag about that now anymore. They treat things like social media like a virus where you can catch radicalism, right? They went on social media and they were radicalized and what have you. So therefore you have to be careful of social media. But one of the things too that's really notable is on Wednesday, the New York Times did an article and that was titled, Russia Trying to Incite Racial Violence, Experts say. Without attributing this garbage to anybody, without coming up with any data to say how viable this is, they ran this incredibly long article. I mean, the New York Times, this is a huge piece. This is more than a third of a page in the New York Times. And it says stuff like, the Russian government has stepped up efforts to inflame racial tensions in the United States as part of its bid to influence November's presidential election, including trying to incite violence by white supremacist groups and to stoke anger among African Americans, according to 7 American officials briefed on recent intelligence. Russia's leading intelligence agency, the SVR, has apparently gone beyond its 2016 methods of interference when operatives tried to stoke racial animosity by creating fake Black Lives Matter groups and spreading disinformation to depress Black voter turnout. Now Russia is also, so it's not creeps like Biden and these charlatans who are running for office that the people are tired of that has anything to do with depressing voter turnout. It's not the fact that none of them is speaking to the interests of the masses of people in this country, and especially Africans and other colonized people, but the Russians. The Russians are doing this. So now Russia is also trying to influence white supremacist group, the officials said. They gave few details, but one official said federal investigators are examining how at least one neo-Nazi organization with ties to Russia is funded. So they didn't say, but they're investigating how it's funded. Other Russian efforts which American intelligence agencies have tracked involve simply prodding white nationalists to more aggressively spread hate messages and amplifying their invective. So now the white nationalists in this country have to be prodded by Russians. They've been lynching, bombing, killing Black people historically, but now the Russians are prodding them to escalate your hatred and invective. Russian operatives are also trying to push Black extremist groups toward violence, according to multiple officials, though they did not detail how. This is an extraordinary piece of garbage, you know, that they put out here. And Russia's more public influence operations, like state-backed news organizations, have continued to push divisive racial narratives, including stories emphasizing allegations of police abuse in the United States and highlighting racism against African Americans within the military. Russians are doing this. And as social media companies more vigilantly monitor for foreign activity than they did in 2016, Russia has also adjusted its methods to evade detection. So you can't see them doing this, and because they've adjusted their methods to evade detection. Rather than disseminate messages as widely as possible, as in 2016, Russian operatives are using private Facebook groups, posts on the online message board, 4chan, and closed chat rooms that are more difficult to monitor, according to intelligence officials. But it's nonsense. And all of this is a preemptive, if you will, strike. It's telling people that whenever you read something or hear something about what's happening to African, first of all, it's equalizing the so-called white nationalist hate groups, the murderers, the killers, the ones who are more openly carrying out U.S. and imperialist policies against Africans and other people. They're equating that with the struggle of African people who are fighting against that kind of thing. So they are both extremist forces. And if you remember, before they declared this was Russian, they had already decided that there's such a thing as black nationalistic, black identity extremists. And I guess they had thought of putting Putin's signature to that, you know. But this is garbage. And so we live in a situation where there's ongoing aggression against African people. And automatically, naturally, there should be an ongoing response to that aggression by African people. And they've already told people that this response, you see, to the traditional colonial hostility to African people is not due to the oppression and exploitation that we're involved in, but to Russians' interference here. So don't believe it. Don't pay any attention to it. It's not black people talking. It's not their pain, their misery, their hostility to colonialism that's the basis of what you see. It's the Russians who are doing this. Obviously, this is garbage, but it's a part of the growing move in this country toward censorship. I mean, anything that challenges the bourgeoisie. So now we put forth our basis, an understanding, clear basis for why coronavirus and other biological assaults are being made on Africans and other colonized people, and the white nationalist government and its minions, this state-supported propaganda institution that's called media, in this instance social media, in this instance Facebook, they've said, okay, you can't believe this. Here's what you have to believe. This is fake. Now let us give you what you should really believe. This is why they engage in this contest of ideas. They say our ideas is the only legitimate ideas that you should listen to. Disregard these ideas. So you should be aware of that. So like I said, they can shut us down any moment, and they'll do the same thing on YouTube and what have you. And that's why I'm telling members of the party in the Uhuru movement that notwithstanding whatever else is happening, we have to move our own propaganda, our own media. We have to write for and distribute the Burning Spear newspaper as the primary means by which we communicate with the people. Also, I just wanted to say that in responding to the coronavirus crisis, again, we have initiated certain emergency protocols within all of our institutions, within our stores, within the various organizing centers that we have, and this is to protect the staff, the members of the movement, and the public at large, based on what information we have now, and as a prelude to the other things that we have to do, because I believe the party and the Uhuru movement, we are well positioned to take on this question of the coronavirus, and perhaps best positioned to take it on in the interest of the people. So be aware of that. I was supposed to be in Russia in late April, where there's the third international conference on self-determination. And I was to be representing the African people at that conference. I understand that at the time, there was supposed to be something like 32 countries represented in that conference. We participated in 2 others. But that won't be happening now due to the coronavirus crisis. That's affected our possibilities of attending and participating in that conference. Also, you should know that earlier in April, we have scheduled the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations from the 10th to the 12th. I was scheduled to do an electoral school in St. Louis, Missouri, at the Uhuru House there. That has been postponed at this point until June probably the second weekend in June. In the interim, though, we will be doing other things that will deal with the critical issues of this moment. One reason we hesitated to postpone is because it's a critical moment now, not only because of the coronavirus, but also because of the political turmoil in the electoral arena that is very obvious and that begs for some kind of leadership and direction for the masses of the people. And so we really hesitated canceling that, and so we just said at one juncture we talked about being able to do it via social media, Zoom, or some other platform that will allow us to communicate with a lot of people at the same time. And we decided instead to postpone till June. Hopefully things will look different and better in June. If not, we still have the option of using a social media platform to conduct this. We are going to have this discussion because people need to look at this social system that cannot even provide health care for the people. There is no health care system in this country. There can't be a health care system because of capitalism, because even health is for sale, or health care is for sale. If everything is done for profit, then you can't have a social system. You got every individual capitalist corporation and what have you, pharmaceutical corporation competing with each other for money. And it has nothing to do with the interests of the people. So there is no social system, there is no health care system, because the social system itself will not permit that. That needs to be discussed. And so that's something that we'll have to talk about. And we'll have to talk about this whole electoral process where people don't have real options. And so in order to try to express, to identify and look for one's interest, one has to try to find it within a platform established by the bourgeoisie, or two different platforms or two related platforms established by the bourgeoisie. In this instance, we're talking about the Democrats and Republicans. That's the bourgeoisie with different names, different colorations, what have you, and sometimes slightly different platforms and programs where sectors of the bourgeoisie gather to push for their own interests in a fashion that does not challenge the existing social system, but allows them to struggle peacefully among themselves for hegemony over the state apparatus. We need to discuss that. We need to say there's something disgusting about this situation, because what this system does, obviously, is makes it increasingly clear that the people have no options except revolution. And that's what our responsibility is as the party. The system will not solve our problem. Democrats, Republicans, and most of the other political organizations that call themselves parties. Africans have to have the African People's Socialist Party. We have to have the Uhuru movement. Without that, the people are defenseless in this struggle. So we will be having discussions around that. We will, the coalition will participate between now and June, where we've talked about having the school. We will also continue to have these discussions around these crucial issues because it's timely and people need some kind of leadership around these questions. In addition to that, the African National Women's Organization had scheduled a March 27th convention, and that has been postponed until July 10th. Again, because of the concerns around the coronavirus issue, and also because it's becoming increasingly difficult to even move around this country. Airlines changing their flight destinations, the frequency of flights, and airline stocks are plunging daily, which is good news. So from March 27th, it has been moved to July 10th at this point. Also, I just want to really send a real shout of appreciation to the comrades in occupied Tanzania called South Africa, because on March 7th, those comrades, the African National Women's Organization in occupied Tanzania, held a pre-convention conference, a conference in anticipation and preparation for what was scheduled to be the March 27th convention of annual that was going to be held in Philadelphia. They did an incredible job. It was unprecedented what they have done, what the party has done in occupied Azania. So while many people are watching those forces who are engaged in political activity now that occupy much of the electoral space, the party is working in townships. And the pre-convention conference that was held on March 7th in occupied Azania called South Africa was held in the Southwest Township, commonly referred to as Soweto. And it was the first such conference in memory of where African women were able to come together to develop a revolutionary project, to bring other African women into revolutionary participation. And the range of women who participated in this conference was extraordinary as well. I mean, young women such as the leader of the organization, Comrade Constance, to women as old as 60 years old. So we had a whole range, a gamut of African women who came out to participate, and that is contributing to changing how politics look, not only in occupied Azania, but throughout Africa, where too often African women have been kept out of leading roles, political roles, and that is changing quickly. So I wanted to say that about the annual convention and the great work that these comrades are doing in South Africa. And it puts many of us to shame. I mean, it's incredibly significant, powerful work that these comrades are doing. I think we still have planned international conferences that's supposed to happen, one in Paris. I don't remember the exact date, it may be September, but I'm not sure. One scheduled for Paris. And we are working in other places throughout the continent of Africa and throughout the United States. There's still tentatively scheduled African Liberation Day mobilization, not in the United States at this point. I mean, well, let me retreat from that negative. I know that we have we are planning an African Liberation Day mobilization in Nassau, Bahamas, and we are also planning for a conference, a world conference, certainly a Caribbean conference tribunal on reparations that for 2021 in occupied Azania, and then and there's other stuff we're engaged in as well. But I just wanted to make note of some of the changes and alterations in how we're moving and where we're moving, and to alert you that within the next several days we will put forth, you should be looking out on all of our sites. You'll be able to see some of the protocols that we're initiating around institutions and around some of our events and meetings and things like that, which have been canceled or postponed or something to that effect. And but in the meantime, we are working toward developing a comprehensive response to this coronavirus issue, because as quiet as it's kept, it is a political question that we are confronted with as colonized and subject people. Nobody's going to look out for us. We got to do this thing ourselves. That's part of fighting against colonialism. That's part of self-determination. And as the Chinese have put it, not just now, but as early as the 1940s, when they were engaged in struggle against Japan and other imperial powers, that people's war is the way forward. And of course, as when Giap really showed the world in the struggle against U.S. and French imperialism in Vietnam, people's war can be victorious. So that's what is going to be necessary for us to initiate in this country dealing with this question and around the world, because like I said, that we faced this in South Africa. Initially, Trump had not put UK on this ban, on this prohibition in terms of coming into the country. That's changed now because it's seeing escalating incidents of coronavirus in what they call the United Kingdom, although it's no longer a kingdom and increasingly less united than it's been in a very long time. So we are having to respond. We've established protocols for our entire movement, our party, across the globe. And that's part of what we've been involved in, and we're going to deepen and clarify this as we move forward. But we just had to do some things on an emergency basis, given the information that we had, that we have at the moment. There are some things, though, and that had to do mostly with protecting people, protecting our movement, protecting our forces, protecting our institutions, and to do that is absolutely necessary for us to project the struggle against this coronavirus as a part of the struggle against colonialism moving forward. So, Uhuru, comrades. I know it's a long intro, but they usually are. So, I want to thank everybody for being here. I was in a meeting just recently where someone expressed real disappointment at the ability of African people to follow like docile slaves at the will of Democratic Party candidates. They look, for example, at Joe Biden and Africans, how Africans in voting for Biden voted against the possibility of health care for everybody and all kinds of other possibilities, reform, because Biden doesn't even offer good reform. And Biden, of course, is the guy who wrote the so-called crime bill that Clinton used to lock up, to flood the prisons. Right now, if you got a relative in prison, African, Biden is responsible for it more than likely. He's the guy who put the cops on the street that kill people like Mike Brown and others. You know, he put 100,000 cops on the street. He won the hearts of the people who are now with Trump by making clear that the Democratic Party was not the party of Jesse Jackson and black people, by doing horrible things. And so Biden was a part of that. And Biden, of course, was the vice president under Obama, even after he had made the most crass anti-African remarks in referring to Obama, to distinguish him as a good Negro versus the rest of us. And so people are disappointed. They say, well, how the hell black people following these guys here? And I saw some other thing that says, well, black people are voting intelligently because it's Africans who recognize that this is where we can get a victory, where a victory can be won, and not going to waste votes on somebody like Bernie Sanders, who appeared to have been the alternative offered. And of course, the real issue is that Africans had no choices. And Africans had no choices because the party doesn't have the influence that it needs to have in order to give people real choices across the board in a universal sense. That Africans need to be able to recognize the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement as the way forward. If without this, then they will end up having to rely on voting for the person they fear less, the institution that they fear less, or voting for what they consider to be realistic as opposed to these ambitious kinds of schemes that would take us to some approximation of real freedom. And of course, the only reason, again, that this appears to be the position of African people is because of the relative weakness of the African People's Socialist Party. It's our responsibility. It's our responsibility to win the consciousness and active participation of the people within the African world to our party and to our movement. African internationalism supplies that. The regional strategy gives us a more comprehensive and cohesive approach to making that happen, but that's our task. So when you say that African people have done this horrible thing for voting for Biden, what we're saying is that the U.S. government succeeded so successfully in the 1960s in destroying the leadership in our communities for our people, whether that was Lumumba in Congo, and Nkrumah in Ghana, whether that was the Panthers and Jomo and other revolutionary organizations on the ground in this country. That was a precondition. That was a precondition for Obama and Biden and others in the Democratic Party to be successful where they are. That was a precondition for every neo-colonial puppet on the continent of Africa, because Lumumba did not simply influence events in Congo. Africans everywhere in Paris were influenced by Lumumba as we were by Nkrumah. So what we have to do is build a revolutionary movement. It's not good enough just to have events. It's not good enough just to protest. It's not good enough just to be extremely clever. We have to put organization on the ground. We have to take up all the political space that there is in the world to be captured by African people. That's why I was going to Russia. Because the Russians and everybody else around the world needs to be won, not to supporting black people for some charity because you feel sorry for us. We are a political force in the world, and what we are looking for is not charity. We're looking for folk who can ally with the interests of the African working class to be self-determining, to recapture Africa and our rights. That's what we're about. That's what we're about. That's what every institution we create is about that. Every organization we create is about that. And so that's the stabilizing factor that makes the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement essential for moving forward and changing the world. Because as quiet as it's kept, the question of African revolution, not Ghana revolution, not Haitian revolution, not some imaginary revolution that's going to happen in Newark, but the African revolution is critical for the destruction of capitalism and the emergence of socialism in the real world. And that doesn't mean $15 an hour. It means that Bernie and his crew won't be able to get $15 an hour because we're taking back the coltan, because we're taking back the resources bled from Africa and African people around the world so that it can take care of Africa and African people. So I just wanted to say those things and then move this agenda forward. Uhuru. So I'm on page 44 and stopped at a very difficult place. No, it's not really difficult, but we start in the middle of a discussion around the mass organizations when we're talking here, obviously, about implementing the regional strategy of the party. So we also have the responsibility to build our mass organizations. NPDUM, NWO, APDEP, APSC, USM, which must also implement the regional strategy as well. These are all areas of political work through which the party has projected itself, politically, organizationally, and ideologically. This is the strategic work that makes the party's presence ubiquitous. We are everywhere. This is where the meaning of leadership is made real. Every leader, member, and committee of our party must take full responsibility for the success of all our work, that for which we are individually responsible as well as that for which the party is responsible as a whole. By doing this, our party and revolution will advance exponentially. Our mass work is improving generally, and we can see concrete development with NPDUM, APDEP, and NWO. However, the regional work, the strategic center of our planned progress and extension, the critical component upon which we are basing party growth and development, as informed by our 7th Congress mandate, voted on by our whole party, leaves much to be desired a year after our Congress and must be rectified immediately. This is not some abstract academic issue. The crisis of imperialism is so pronounced today that our failure to rectify the contradictions central to the success of our people's hundreds-year-old oppression, exploitation, and daily national humiliation will constitute criminal betrayal. This is not an abstract discussion. And when you look at what we're talking about now, something like this horrible pandemic, the coronavirus, and I'm not going to even get into a discussion at this moment about its source, where it comes from. I'm not going to even comment on the fact that
even as the United States is involved and has been involved in now for years, and especially since this most recent regime in the United States, in war, trade war, sanctions, various other kinds of attacks on China, and threats to its so-called allies and minions, neo-colonial puppets, not to trade with China. This is publicly reported on in bourgeois newspapers, even as this is happening. Even as the United States has been engaged in low-intensity warfare with Iran for periods of time, using Stuxnet and other kinds of viruses, speaking of viruses, to destroy their capacity or impair their capacity to carry out their nuclear program. They initiated sanctions, even as the United States has used Saudi Arabia to impact on the price of oil to their great detriment at this point. So that Russia that relied on the oil, and Iran whose economy relied on the oil, and Venezuela whose economy relied on the oil would suffer to the extent that it has suffered up to now. I'm not saying that it means automatically that the United States is responsible for dropping a virus off that's killing all these people in China, affected so many people in China and Iran, where even leaders of the Iranian government have been affected and some died through that. I'm not saying that at this point. That's a discussion for some other time. But I wanted to, I just think that we have to be clear of what it is that we are dealing with. This is not an academic issue. And Africa is least prepared than any country in the world to deal with this kind of epidemic. Africa has been bled for so long. Even Africans who are in this country and who are most likely any place in the world to be viewing this and participate in this discussion that we're having now, so much better off than Africans in other places around the world, and in particular on the continent of Africa. So we are least prepared to deal with that on the continent of Africa, but we have great responsibility to deal with it as a people. And Africa's on the continent cannot deal with this by ourselves. So that's one of the benefits of having the African Socialist International and having a regional strategy that we are using to be able to deploy forces where we need, resources where we need them to respond to the kinds of crises we are confronted with. And that's what should help us understand, clarify that this is not an academic question for us. Millions of people, Africans and colonized people in particular, standing to be decimated through this process. So this coronavirus, and it's colonialism that has impaired our capacity to respond to this. We don't even have, look at Africa. No roads, no hospitals. Sometimes to go to a hospital, you have to bring your own medicine. It's just a crazy thing. You have to bring your own sheets for beds and things like that, if there is such a thing as a hospital. But doctors can't even make a living. A doctor have to come and work in Harlem or work someplace in the United States in order to make a living. Nurse has to leave Africa to come make a living in a place like the United States. Africa, this is not an academic question that we're engaged in now. We are up against one of the most ruthless entities that's ever existed on the planet Earth. And the party is the way forward. And every member of our party, every member of the Uhuru movement must accept this incredible responsibility as our own, and that's what we've tried to simplify with the regional strategy that we're implementing now. So we say imperialism in crisis creates conditions to advance the revolution. The Party of Professional Revolutionaries of the African Working Class has voluntarily assumed custody of the liberation and unification of our Africa and our forcibly dispersed African nation. The Party of Professional Revolutionaries of the African Working Class has voluntarily has voluntarily assumed custody of the liberation and unification of our Africa and our forcibly dispersed African nation. We have voluntarily said that we will fight the most powerful enemy of humanity on the planet Earth that's ever existed. We have volunteered for this. This was voluntary. And it has meant certain things in terms of the kind of organization we have, the kinds of principles that we adhere to, etc., to make that possible. Imperialism is experiencing obvious disarray. The international bourgeoisie is split in 1,000 different ways. Raging wars and threats of war continue unabated. Traditional bourgeois alliances are under severe stress due to growing competition between parasitic international thieves for shrinking access to the colonial resources. They are fighting over resources violently extracted at the expense of our lives and freedoms and totally necessary for the continued success of the capitalist system globally. The economic configuration of the world is undergoing transformation at this very moment. The economic configuration of the world is undergoing transformation at this very moment. And this, of course, is written before there was this recognition of some kind of coronavirus, because that was what informed us. And that's really important. That's why we have these political reports, because we can go back. You can't understand something just by what you're looking at today. You need to know the history of the process that got us where we are. And we were talking about the economic configuration of the world undergoing transformation at this very moment. Trade wars between China and the United States, the Brexit crisis that has paralyzed England politically and disrupted strategic assumptions of capitalist development in Europe and the world, the growing split between the wealthy North and poorer South threatening the future of Spain, the disruptive emergence of an energized, if economically challenged Russia contesting U.S. hegemony in the Middle East and upsetting the balance of forces in Europe and elsewhere, the audacious China that sometimes aligned with Russia is increasingly willing to openly contend with the U.S. These are just a few of the examples of an imperialism experiencing existential crisis. And if just in that paragraph alone, you can see the basis of why the U.S. is moving certain ways. And even, we talked about how recognizing certain laws of gravity and what have has allowed scientists and astronomers to know that there have been existing entities in space that you couldn't see. And you knew that were there because you understood some things about the laws of gravity. And you can see a planet wobbling a certain way. You knew that there was a gravitational pull that was someplace affecting it. That's the thing that helped you know that there was another planet out there, even if you couldn't see it. And what I'm saying is this paragraph alone establishes the information for us to be able to understand some things, even if you don't see it when it happens, even if you didn't see them put the biological entity someplace in this country, because you understand this system and etc., its presence. There are others: Korea, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, most of the Americas. Uninformed and poorly led battles are raging across the African continent. This is complicated by the contest for economic and political advantages between China, the U.S., and former European colonizers. This is a contest that does not have the fully developed advantage of a coherent African internationalist, informed and organized effort by Africans to conquer power in our own name and in our own interests. The U.S. is the headquarters of a dying imperialism, as we have known it for the past 70 years. It is the center of the storm wreaking havoc with imperialist unity internationally, in part because of domestic imperialist disunity. A naked battle is going on between the Trump regime and other sectors of the bourgeoisie, sometimes within his own regime. Trump's election failed to resolve the generally nonviolent battle for control of the state, which bourgeois elections are designed to do. This is really important to understand, and this is part of what we should be talking about more when we're talking about this electoral process. But most of the so-called leftists, etc., do not understand or do not recognize or do not unite with the understanding that an election in this country, a bourgeois election, is simply a contest between different sectors of the bourgeoisie for control of the state. It's a nonviolent contest. It's an instrument of the state, if you will, to make sure that struggles do not get out of hand. How these different sectors of bourgeoisie don't have to start wars inside the country about who's going to control what, because they can do this nonviolently by holding an election, by purchasing people who run for office, by creating actual schools that train people to run for office, that create families, whole families, create dynasties to carry out this whole social system for them. So his election, Trump's, failed to resolve the generally nonviolent battle for control of the state which bourgeois elections are designed to do. This is the contest we have characterized as an uneasy equilibrium. The task of our party is to tip the scales of history to the advantage of the oppressed, to the advantage of the future. Our job is to negate the system of colonial capitalism by replacing it with a system of socialism resting on a foundation of a totally liberated and united African continent. And this is important to make the statement because like some people they call themselves anti-imperialists, etc., and they criticize the U.S. and they criticize capitalism, etc., but they don't talk about negating capitalism. They don't talk about negating colonialism. They talk as if somehow the capitalists and the socialists that they project as something they're interested in can occupy the same social space. Socialism is born at the expense of capitalism. It has to be negated. If you got capitalism and what you call socialism in the same space, that's ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. In fact, that's one of the reasons that we have created what we call a strategy of dual and contending power. Our power, our institutions are not something that we create to coexist permanently with the colonialism. Ours is to negate the colonialism in our lives and what have you, to take over the spaces so that they are controlled by us and not by the colonial powers and not by the capitalists. Our Africa must be led by the forcibly dispersed African nation under the leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class, whose very existence has been in preparation for this task. The African working class whose very existence has been in preparation for this task. And when we say the forcibly dispersed African nation, we don't just mean the Africans who live in Amsterdam or in Houston. We're talking about the whole African nation has been forcibly dispersed. The borders on the continent of Africa constitute a part of that forcible dispersion as well. So, comrades, this is the context within which we must examine both our readiness and unity to achieve the aims demanded of us at this moment. Sometimes we have the unity but are not capable or prepared to take on the revolutionary mission ahead of us. Sometimes we are prepared or capable of taking on tasks associated with the mission, but are without the unity demanded of professional revolutionaries. Sometimes we may be lacking in both readiness and unity. The party cannot afford to be consumed with perpetually fighting, year after year, month after month, week after week, day after day, and every hour to win the unity within our leadership to carry out the mission for which we were created. Each of us has a responsibility to push our party and revolution forward, to propel us into a future of African liberation, unification, and the emancipation of the working class of Africa and the world. Every one of us has that responsibility. Every one of us has that responsibility. To do so, we must truly assume responsibility to fight for the success of our regions and every department, task, resolution, and mandate of our party. ANWO is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party, not just of the leadership of ANWO. The International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement is an institution of the party, not just of the leadership of NPDM. The African People's Solidarity Committee is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party, not just of the leadership of APSC. And the same thing is true of USM and all of the other forces that we've created. Each of us has responsibility for the success of the entire party and all of our programs and all of our institutions. To do so, we must truly assume responsibility to fight for the success of our regions and every department, task, resolution, and mandate of our party. Vanguard Up is more than just a slogan. It means measurable accomplishments in carrying out our mission. We must put down the infrastructure of the regions on the ground during this year, 2020. That is our mandate. It means we are materialists, demanding of ourselves and others the organizational standards necessary for our victory. It also means that the party and each of us must insist that those who cannot measure up to the standards of leadership step down and free the party to move forward. We all understand that in our party, discipline is voluntary. We are disciplined because we are African internationalists, united with the general mission of our party, as well as the resolutions and mandates that come from our congresses and our plenaries. And it's important to make that statement because people often come to the party. They've seen us on social media. They've seen an amazing campaign that we ran for elected office, and they've seen some other thing like that we've done, and they sometimes think that's all we are. They might have watched the presentation the other night with Jesse and Penny dealing with the coronavirus question. But we work, and we are disciplined, and we adhere to revolutionary principles, which is extremely important if we're going to win, because it's easy to be for the revolution as long as the revolution is way off. But as the revolution gets closer to us, then that's where the real task, that's where the real question, we are confronted with, whether we are serious about doing this or not. And too often, people won't say, well, I wasn't really serious. They'll say that something is wrong with us for asking them to be serious. And this is voluntary. It's really important for us to continue to emphasize that this is voluntary, the being in the party in particular. So we say that we understand that in our party, discipline is voluntary. We are disciplined because we are African internationalists, united with the general mission of our party as well as the resolutions and mandates that come from our congresses and our plenaries. However, we are not liberals and we are not anarchists. We have organizational principles and rules of party discipline that provide us with the organizational means to ensure party discipline. This too is an example of the unity of theory and practice. Until our discipline is tested by practice, it is only unity in theory. Until our discipline, is tested in practice, it is only unity in theory. And that's what it's called when the rubber hits the ground or something to that. I mean, we've had people who were united with us in theory, then the practice. Adherence to democratic centralism, following through on the mandates and resolutions that come from our congresses and other entities that we've created for making decisions and what have you. Our organizational principles and structures exist to make our discipline a practical reality. And sometimes, especially if one is if one is shooting for stardom, and, because we will say as we move forward, we've moved beyond this era of what do you call it, so-called, what do you call it when people are supposed to be so charismatic leadership, where the leadership is reliant on some individual who, charisma and whatever. We created organization, real structures and what have you. So people seeking stardom will find themselves dismayed or something. Likewise, the unity and discipline necessary for the successful implementation of our regional strategy and mass work cannot be brought to fruition without organizational oversight that reinforces the voluntary discipline within the party. Director of organization appointed. To rectify some of our organizational shortcomings, we will leave this plenary having appointed Comrade Chimaringa Salambayo, Director of Organization. This will minimize the practice of establishing party organizations and committees that, in violation of our organizational principles, are structurally unaccountable. Among the constitutionally mandated responsibility of the director of organization are ensure all party organizations are functioning according to the Constitution, policies set forth by the Congress and NCC. Submit a monthly organizing report. C, work closely with the regional chairpersons to build local party organizations and units where none exist. D, work as a chief field organizer to maintain and build the party. I'm also calling on our director of organization to oversee the party's less than effective fraction work. The fractions are the means by which the party ensures that analysis and interests of the revolution are carried into our mass work. This does not only include the mass organizations that are not party organizations, but fraction work must also be conscientiously carried out in party organizations such as Vanguard Up and NPDUM as well as USM. Our organizational manual does a good job in explaining fraction work and must be used by our director of organization to advance our work. The truth is that the party must lead everything, and the party fraction is our method of guaranteeing that we are always organized as the party in whatever political work we undertake. The initiation of leadership and oversight of our fraction work is simply another way that provide the tightest organization possible for leading our revolution, especially during this moment of imperialist crisis when the political stakes are so high and the possibilities of peril or advancement so strong. Everywhere there's a sufficient number of party members to do so, we must initiate fractions in our mass work, including in Vanguard Up, NPDUM, USM, etc. We must develop and learn to carry out fraction work. This will not be done overnight, but our director of organization must put fraction work high on the agenda for building the party within the regions responsible for carrying out our regional strategy. This is the way the party's agenda is effectively carried out in every area of the work. This makes us better African internationalists. This makes us better practitioners of African internationalist theory. Recruitment is key. For every difficulty we are confronted with in our work, almost every difficulty we are confronted with in our work revolves around the issue of recruitment. Recruitment has been an ongoing issue for us in virtually every area. There are just not enough people to take on the growing increasingly important tasks, campaigns, and programs we have established. We must fill out some of the positions in our structure to fulfill the mandates and resolutions of our incredibly powerful 7th Congress. We have initiated several important campaigns and programs to tackle the need for more effective recruitment. This includes the powerful N2U volunteer program and our membership and sustainable funding massive campaign. We are currently struggling to win the party and Uhuru movement to implement both these projects that have proven their efficacy when properly utilized. However, they have not been consistently made use of, something we must rectify. One impediment to our recruitment has been our general approach. Too much of our recruitment efforts have relied on social media contacts or a centralized process where recruits have been vetted through our National Office of Recruitment and Membership. Many, if not most, of our social media contacts have proven to be unreliable. Often they consist of people who have viewed a snippet of information, a video presentation, or a political activity done by the party or movement as the basis for their membership application. In this era of social media militancy, most applicants have no idea of what it takes to be a member of the advanced attachment, the Vanguard. This has left many potential recruits overwhelmed upon being confronted by the basic organizational principles of democratic centralism and the work and discipline required for membership in our party. The regional strategy adopted by the party at our 7th Congress is the way out of this apparent dilemma. Now, the party's headquarters or the National Office of Recruitment and Membership no longer has the sole or primary responsibility for building the party. The regional strategy initiated a process of democratic centralist decentralization by placing the strategic process of building the party and of growing our membership in the hands of regional representatives and regional committees. This is a method of party building that would grow the party by building party organizations and party membership in every state, province, city, and community within their respective regions. Our Seventh Party Congress, our highest body, initiated the regional strategy that in the U.S. has given the newly designated 4 regions of the party primary responsibility for growing and developing the party within specifically designated geographical areas: states, provinces, cities, villages, communities, blocks, prisons and prison wings, workplaces, universities, and other schools, etc. The whole Central Committee or national office is not necessary for carrying out this work directly. The division of labor within the Central Committee allows for each regional representative or chair and regional committee to take full responsibility for the regional work under the supervision of the Central Committee and appropriate leaders of the political bureau and designated components of the party apparatus. Our emphasis on the significance of the regional strategy must not be allowed to overshadow the fact that the party unit is the foundation of the party structure upon which all our success relies. I just want to repeat that. The party unit is the foundation of the party structure upon which all our success relies. The unit is the rock upon which the entire party structure rests, and the strength and legitimacy of our leaders are determined. The regional strategy simply identifies the responsibility for building the party throughout the regions and provinces. Our regional representatives and committees develop the organizing strategy for establishing our party and movement throughout the region. They determine the strategy for building the units, appropriately known as cells, the foundation and building block for any organism. Party's organization manual must be our Bible. The party's organization manual is our go-to book for every organizational question that arises in the democratic centrist implementation of the regional strategy. The party manual should be read and studied constantly. Study your manual and you will be able to build and lead your organizations on every level. We learn from the party's organizational manual that the unit is the, quote, the basic form of party organization, unquote. That, quote, may be formed in prison, workplace, neighborhoods, neighborhood block, etc. within a city. The unit consists of a minimum of 3 members, the necessary number for implementation of the democratic centralist principles of 1 leader and 2 followers. The party's organization manual also spells out the leadership structure of the unit, something that all party leaders and members, but especially the regional representatives or chairs, are going to have to review to carry out the regional strategy to build the party going forward. So, again, we place a lot of emphasis here on developing the local party unit, local party organization and units, etc., and using the manual to do that. I want to move now to page 51. Everyone should read all of this, by the way. I'm skipping some of this because I just know that the real responsibility for doing what we're talking about is in in the party and in our cadre organization. And I know that there are a lot of people who participate in the study who are not there, so it may or may not be effective or essential to everybody to look at this. I'm suggesting that you can, but I'm saying that the party, members of our party, members of our cadre organizations, members of our movement need to pay special attention to everything that I've read and even that which I'm not reading now. This political report is something that we need to be continually talking about and we need to be training people how to carry out some of the stuff that's being discussed right now. It's not a given that just because it's written here, people know how to do it. People have to be trained to make this happen. So, we say there's much more that can be on page 51. The fourth paragraph from the bottom, there's much more that can be said about the party structure and especially the essential role of the party unit. For a while now, our party has suffered some organizational issue because the posts of Secretary General and Director of Organization were unfilled. Both of these party offices, and especially the Director of Organization, have important roles in organization development and maintenance, and would keep recognition and significance of the party structure before us at all times. In any event, it should be clear how proper utilization of the party's organizational structure will have a major impact on our recruitment process and success. Utilizing the party structure would concentrate much, if not most, of our recruitment at our unit and local party level. A party organizer who is recruiting within a neighborhood, prison, wing, campus, or job where her main party work is centered will be more likely to recruit someone capable of doing party work within the structure where she is located. Which simply means that if we have recruiters, if we have party organizers in a housing project in a particular block in a particular community, that the people who they're working with constantly, because this is where they work all the time, they're bringing people into the party, into our structures, into NPDM, what have you, who they know or who they meet in the process of doing this political work. And they are working within a defined area that the people who live there or who exist there, whether it's on a campus or a prison wing or just in a block, a neighborhood community, they have some familiarity with the political and economic terrain that's there, the social composition and terrain that's there. So it's not like when we recruit somebody in this block that we're recruiting them to lead the region. We're recruiting them to play leading roles in that block, to sell the burning spear, to know the people who live there, to connect with the masses of people on an ongoing, regular basis so that we become part of the fabric of that community itself. We become what the Mao used to refer to as the fish in this sea of the masses and what have you. And that's where we organize. That's where we win people to. And we can recruit people into our leading structures there. We're not trying to recruit them into the leadership of the region. There, in that block, on that campus, in that prison wing. This is where we are recruiting forces to come in, and they can handle that. They know it. They know it better than most of us who, would otherwise be there. I mean, many of the political operatives who you see out in the world wouldn't last 3 days if they were dropped in the middle of one of these communities where the people have to survive and know everything about it on a regular basis. That's what we want to create. That's what we have to create. So I'm not afraid of that. Some people were concerned, but because, we've seen some rotten forces in addition to all the heroic people who constitute the membership of the party. We've seen some rotten forces come through here. And as a consequence, they've done some rotten, damaging things to the party. So we say, well, wow, I don't want to take any chances here. No, this is where they will be working. If some of the rotten forces who've come through here were locked into having to develop and make something happen in that block where they live, they wouldn't have lasted 30 days. They wouldn't have lasted any time at all. So this is what it is that we're talking about doing. So recruiting within the unit territory, we're bringing recruits who will have great expertise within that basic area of responsibility. They will know the neighborhood, the campus, prison wing, etc. And if they prove to be problem recruits, the potential for organizational disruption will be confined to the specific area of organizational responsibility instead of the entire party. And this is obviously something that's good for security as well. Security as well. Recruiting within the party unit or local arena will usually be done by party members while doing actual political work, likely while selling the burning spear. This will help to define the character of recruits because they will understand from the beginning that to be among the vanguard is to do actual, practical political work. It's not sitting in front of a computer, gossiping and slandering and getting in I don't know, you can't call them fisticuffs, whatever the kind of scraps that people have on the computer. It's right there in that community. They know that this is what we're about because that's how they meet us. They see us in these communities doing the work, and they expect that they would have to do this kind of work too. That's why they come to admire us, because we're there doing the work. Weekly meetings will be conducted within the party unit. Weekly political education, focusing primarily on, but not limited to, the party's 14-point platform, will provide every member of the party unit with the ideological foundation necessary for understanding and explaining the party's worldview and goals. And I can't overemphasize that. If we have weekly studies of just that 14 points, right there in that region, right there in that block, right there on that campus, etc., it will really equip. We had a comrade, 19-year-old sister, who because of that kind of study, just on the platform, we were able to send all around the world. We did send her all around the world building Desi Wood's work. And she could go, what we believe, right? What we stand for, what we believe. She could, on almost any question in the world, she could deal with it through that 14 points. Everybody can do that. They can do that right there in that unit. They can even learn how to articulate it better than you. They can do it in a fashion that responds to the immediate reality that they're confronted with all the time. They can say it in their own language and what have you. It needs to become theirs. Just like this political report has become the property of all the members of the party, so should the 14-point platform that we're teaching on a regular basis, redundantly, over and over and over again throughout. This will, weekly meetings will be conducted within the party unit. Weekly political education, focusing primarily but not limited to the party's 14-point platform, will provide every member of the party unit with the ideological foundation necessary for understanding and explaining the party's worldview and goals. This will also be a most significant method of spreading revolutionary anti-colonial consciousness throughout the working class enclaves of the colony. It will influence political and ideological debate throughout the colony. It will force every political hustler to defend himself from the party's revolutionary line in political work. We put that down in the community. Put it down in the community. Win the masses to this. And we will have somebody who will fight, for the political line harder than anybody else. And hustlers who come through there trying to sell this or that, Democratic or any other thing, will have to be able to speak to this political program to somebody living in the housing project. And you know what? In the 1960s, as quiet as it's kept, it was members of the Panther Party, members of Joe Moore, and organizers like this on the ground in our communities. When we first confronted the pigs during this period of time, the pigs had no meaningful political education. And they were made demoralized and affected in a very serious way. They run up against some kid who would tell them who the hell they were. That they're arms of the state, you're a colonial terrorist and this kind of thing, etc. It made the pigs have to have political education because the kids were telling them who the hell they were. It was a demoralizing thing. This is the beginning of the politicization inside the police departments in this country. So these colonial terrorists had to be able to defend themselves in the community for young people who were working for the people. That's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. They are still politicized, however. The pigs are politicized. Now we have to politicize the masses of people in the working class communities. Weekly fundraising, weekly unit fundraising, and Buy Black Power sales will inculcate self-reliance at the party's base as the underpinning upon which the party's economic development process will rest, and through which the party will teach the African nation to love and participate in our own independent economy. This is something that's relatively foreign to many of the political organizers. We have weekly studies. Every week we do these studies. It makes the people who have the responsibility to conduct the studies, it makes them better cadre. It makes it necessary for them to understand the line much better, to be able to speak the line much more effectively. It creates the conditions where people in the local work, the local organizations can even challenge, if necessary, leadership around the politic of the party. It minimizes this potential for subjectivism that permeates all areas of work that we're confronted with. Somebody gets upset because you didn't speak to me on my anniversary or any other kind of silliness like this. We put the politic there in a very profound and deep way. This is what we believe in. And when we make a criticism, we have now established the political basis, the ideological basis for the criticism. This is the basis of the criticism. You criticize based on adherence or lack thereof to these principles and to the principles associated with the discipline of the party. This creates a much better, tighter, disciplined organization. It changes and challenges the consciousness of the people who live in the community. It makes it possible for people to for the masses, defend themselves against alien and hostile politic and propaganda that's always trying to penetrate our community. Ultimately, and the whole issue of a weekly fundraiser. I mean, even if it's washing a car, or selling fish sandwiches, or dinners and things like that. I mean, it changes the entire communities that we live in, changes us, and it changes the organizers. People begin to have a whole different understanding of self-reliance. Because we got to get flyers. We got to make all of this stuff happen. How the hell do we make it happen? We have these fundraisers all the time as the party. We have to get from St. Petersburg, Florida, to St. Louis. We got to raise money to do that. We have a treasurer now. Because we have a treasurer because we got money to put in the treasury. And the reason we got money is because we're always doing fundraisers. Every week we are doing fundraisers. And this is part of what contributes even to our ability to have economic development. Right now, the party is involved in developing Uhuru Wabinki, Freedom Bank, which begins, like as a loan institution inside the party, but which we see as an incipient bank that we will be able to take into the world at large, into the African world at large. So we start this process of having to put X numbers of dollars into the bank for startup capital. Where do we get it from? Because we get it from the fundraisers that we do regularly. And this is crucial. This is absolutely important because sometimes what we have is somebody in the work has a good job or something, and when the party needs something, we end up this person making this contribution because they got a good job, as opposed to collectively doing work to make sure that we raise the money. And this is what has to happen on an ongoing, regular basis because we need those resources. Ultimately, with the immediate leadership of the local party organization, the party unit will likely be the instrument through which most mandated movement local offices will be required. The growth and development of the African People's Socialist Party continues unabated. The African People's Socialist Party that is being entreated today to Vanguard Up has a history of development that defied all the imperialist-created odds. We are a party of the African working class, where the revolutionary aspirations of our people are centered. It is also the social force, the class, that bore the brunt of the war against our just struggle for liberation that resulted in the elevation of the imperialist-generated African petty bourgeoisie to nominal leadership of our people at the expense of the interests of the African nation and working class. I think it's really important for us to be clear that it's the African working class that bore the brunt of this hit in terms that defeated the Black Revolution in the 1960s. And even if we look at people like Malcolm X, became this urbanized, the leader of the urban working class in this country, in the northern section of this country. And Martin Luther King was killed at the height of the Poor People's Campaign. And at an instance when, as opposed to the petty bourgeoisie simply telling people what to do, it was the workers who told King to come into Memphis, Tennessee to help with the organizing of the sanitation workers. I mean, these are critical things, and the working class is critical. But most instances, the working class does not have access to our own leadership. That's the essence of the split between Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. That's the essence of the split between Malcolm X and even the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and that's the essence of the contradiction that the party and our revolutionary organizations have with neo-colonial or petty bourgeois forces, whether they call themselves the NAACP or what have you, is that the working class has to have the ability to speak to its own interests, has to have the ability, has to have the program, has to have the leadership, has to have the organization, has to have a real capacity to speak to our own interests. That's the struggle. That's the regional strategy, by the way. It has been the unrelenting, turbulent, organized quest for liberation, one that has experienced exasperating disappointments as well as amazing victories that has brought us to this place today. And this quest will bring us to the realization of the real regional strategy. It has been our ability for ongoing summation of this quest for liberation that has brought us to this first plenary of the 7th Congress and to the 7th Congress itself. Today, as we predict the success for our battle for the total liberation and unification of Africa and the globally dispersed African nation, we do so despite the setbacks we have endured and the contradictions in our work, some of which are noted in this political report. We do so in part because our African internationalist ideological tether has allowed us to endure and thrive in organization. It is organization in the form of our party that represents the practice uniting African internationalist theory, moving us beyond the interpretation of the world and into the practical arena of changing the world. And I can't overstate the significance of the endurance of the African People's Socialist Party all these years. I mean, the experiences we've collected as a party, as a phenomenon in history over the last 50 or more years. There is a continuum for the revolutionary project that exists inside the African People's Socialist Party. I think perhaps I should stop now because I want to have a clear shot at talking about the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, or NPDUM, next time out. So I'll stop now on page 53. Uhuru.
Uhuru, let's salute our leadership. Chairman Omali Yeshitela for that powerful study. Thank you, Chairman. So it is now time to open up with questions from our audience and online viewers. We want to appreciate everyone who's tuning in via Facebook and YouTube, and also appreciate all of your engagement. Please continue to invite your friends and family to the study and share widely on all of your social media platforms. And of course, we always like to start off by saying where people are viewing from: Spokane, Washington, St. Louis, Missouri, Boston, Massachusetts, Los Angeles, California, St. Petersburg, Florida, Clearwater, Florida, Fort Myers, Florida, Tampa, Florida, Oakland, California, Louisville, Kentucky, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Kuwait, Washington, D.C., Douglas, Georgia, Chicago, Illinois, Toronto, Canada, Huntsville, Alabama, Dubai, Cape Town, South Africa, Kansas City, Missouri, San Diego, California, Newark, New Jersey, Curacao in the Caribbean, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have salutes coming from Comrade Matum Nyobe, who is the Northern Regional Representative in Philadelphia. The name on Facebook is, I think it's Tini Uhuru, Chairman, Powerful Comrades, studying from Dubai, One Black Love. Raya Fogarty comments, Uhuru, salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, watching from St. Louis. And Nasir Alamin comments, studying from Kuwait. So that's what we have in terms of engagement so far. And again, please type your questions into the comment box. But right now, Chairman, there is not a question as of yet. Uhuru.
I wonder, that being the case, I wonder if I should I jump into the NPDUM section of this, or should I? Okay, it is a clear place to start from next week. All right. I just want to say that, there can't be enough said or too much said about the significance of the party, of having a revolutionary organization, the advanced detachment of the working class. It's different from saying that we're the working class. We're not saying we are the working class. We are the representative. We are the organization, the advanced attachment of the working class. And that should be really important, because sometimes the working class, and perhaps most instances under normal, quote unquote, circumstances, the working class has been captured in terms of our consciousness and our understanding of the world by the bourgeoisie through the instrument, most likely, of the petty bourgeoisie and other means by which the bourgeoisie controls information, education, etc. And so our responsibility, and the difference, of course, is that the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie have a material interest in the preservation of this social system. And so there is a material interest in what they do. But the African working class does not have a material interest in the preservation of this system. So sometimes the African working class finds itself being held hostage in terms of its consciousness by the bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeoisie. At the moment, though, we penetrate that consciousness with helping the class to recognize what its material interests happen to be, then the working class moves into its own organizational space and begins to function differently. That's why it's so important for us to be where the class is. That's why we talk about working, and because in many instances the working class, I say to the extent that often it formally concludes things, the working class, though, experiences serious alienation from the petty bourgeoisie, from the bourgeoisie. And you see examples of this kind of resistance all the time. The way the class dresses, no matter where you are in the world, the working class dresses differently, it acts differently, and it is suspicious of most of the edicts that come from the rulers. Even if it doesn't have an explanation, an answer of its own, it is suspicious of that. And we have an opportunity and a responsibility to provide the kind of political education, direction, and organization for the class. That's what it means to be the advanced detachment of the class. That's what it means to say that we are the general staff of the class. We are that organization, that force that helps the class to get to the place that it needs to get to be. And we are the professional revolutionaries, and they are not, mostly. And we want to make as many of those who, among the African working class, want to bring them into the revolutionary project. That's what our primary task is. So, where are we, Comrade Director Akile? Do we need to? Because we don't have to. I want to advise people they should seek out as much information as possible on this coronavirus thing. You should look to the Black is Black Coalition for Social Justice website, especially, but not exclusively, that which is coming from the Healthcare Working Group. Comrade Sister Lisa Davis has, as I said, compiled a lot of information regarding that. that's being put forward. And you can go to keep up with the sites of the Burning Spear online and all of the party and infidom institutions, because we will be increasingly laying out information directives and regarding this coronavirus issue. And the fact is, as we just demonstrated, explained in terms of how Facebook and other state-aligned institutions like the New York Times, and not just them, attempting to impose censorship on our discussion, trying to determine what it is that we're saying, that we have to be able to locate forces that do a better job in helping us to come to good conclusions. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll see within the next several days the party will be going beyond the emergency protocols that we've established and offering up real practical leadership for how we will be moving forward. Uhuru. Yeah.
Chairman, so we got a couple questions in. Comrade Safari from Occupy Tanzania, the chair of Occupy Tanzania, chair of APSP Occupy Tanzania, says, Uhuru, comrade, I have a question in terms of raising funds. Thomas Sankara said the hand that feeds you controls you. I am thinking of whether we can accept any money from the capitalist examples like Coca-Cola.
I don't think we need to be accepting money from Coca-Cola unless it's behind a bandana. But I think that what we have to do is do everything we can to generate the capacity for independent funding, first of all, among the class. And then the advantage we have of sorts is that we are engaged in both the national liberation struggle. That means that all of the Africans suffer from colonial domination. And so sometimes even Africans from the petty bourgeoisie will be able to unite with the struggle that we're leading against colonialism and contribute to that. And we have to have instruments through which those contributions can be made. For example, I know we're talking about doing things like a car wash, and some other economic ventures in South Africa. So some of that money we might see coming from them. But I think we're going to have to rely heavily on the participation of our own forces, like doing the fundraisers, selling the dinners, and doing other kinds of things that can give us the capital that we need. And the other thing is, we're struggling to become self-reliant. Let me just say that. Uhuru. Comrade Tafari is the leader of as has been said, the African People's Socialist Party, Occupy Tanzania, often referred to as South Africa, and they're doing incredibly important, powerful work there. And Comrade Tafari has also been appointed as the Director of Organization for Africa, so he'll be working to organize the party throughout the African continent. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, there was a question from Comrade Yejide Odumila, who is the president of the African National Women's Organization, says, Uhuru, Chairman, can you explain the class contradiction and how it manifests in Africa specifically? Some of our people are confused when they see people like Mugabe and other neo-colonial leadership because they say they are nationalists and oppose international intervention.
Well, it is true that often you will find nationalists who will fight against direct colonial domination, and sometimes even neo-colonialism on the African continent, or a form of neo-colonialism, I should say. Like, for example, in South Africa, what we have is a Zuma who has the appearance of a certain kind of nationalism, but he's aligned economically more like with China and India, while you've got the guy who is the current president there, who Ramaphosa, the billionaire former worker representative, who's aligned to U.S. and Anglo-European capital. And so you will see forces like Zuma winning favor among certain of the nationalists in South Africa as opposed to Ramaphosa. You have somebody like Robert Mugabe, who at one juncture pretended to be a socialist, but he's a nationalist of sorts, and he or was a nationalist, and he won the ire of the bourgeoisie internationally because he was taking the land, and even if he was only taking land for the petty bourgeois Africans in Zimbabwe, it was taking it from the white rulers, and so Africans really appreciated somebody who would take a stance, an obvious open political stance against the white nationalists. People came to love Idi Amin from Uganda because Amin initially, he kicked the Asians out of Uganda. You know, the British brought a lot of Asians, Indians, and others into Africa who ended up functioning kind of as intermediaries. They were giving a certain capacity that contributed to a certain kind of atrophy of any petty bourgeois African, development, etc., on purpose. And so when Amin kicked them out, he won favor for all kinds of black people, and he said, he insulted the British, etc. But Amin is the guy who fought for the English, the British Rifles, against Mau Mau in Kenya, and helped to destroy the Kenyans and whatever. And plus, there were those horrible things that Amin was responsible for. But sometimes these guys can present this nationalist kind of appearance, and sometimes they are nationalists. And that's why we say that it is the responsibility of the African working class to be organized, because we're not just engaged in a struggle for national liberation. We're engaged in a struggle actually for social transformation. And this social transformation can only be led by the African working class that fights against the social system, that fights for the unification of Africa and African people around the world, the destruction of all these borders that separate us, and for an independent economy that contributes to the development of the entire continent of Africa and Africans everywhere on the planet Earth. The Vietnamese went through this. The Vietnamese were, I think, some of the best examples. But it's also, you really have to understand there's a certain contradiction here. The Vietnamese were extraordinary. I mean, some of the best examples that I can find, for revolutionary struggle anywhere, you will find it like with the Vietnamese. And because they waged an incredible struggle against the French and then U.S. colonialism. They organized and united the entire Vietnamese nation to do that. They developed what would be considered more or less a revolutionary national democratic program that united all of these forces against the U.S. French and U.S. imperialism. But it happened under the leadership of the Vietnamese Communist Party, the working class. And we engage in certain kinds of struggle like that too, developing revolutionary anti-national democratic programs. But this, first of all, this unity the unity that we're talking about can't happen just by the petty bourgeoisie by itself, not really against imperialism. And because the petty bourgeoisie is also contending all the time with each other to such an extent that it makes it hard for them to unite. And then secondly, if we're going to go beyond simply flag independence and actual social transformation that elevates the working class and poor peasantry, then it's going to have to be revolutionary struggle in the possession of the African working class. Uhuru.
Comrade Nasir made a comment and asked a question, says, I want to convey my appreciation to the chairman and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement for their recent brief videos detailing African internationalism. It is very useful for our people that have been conditioned to have a short attention span for political education that does not come from capitalist mediums. And then he also asks, recently I had a brother that is opposed to framing the discussion in terms of capitalism and colonialism as its origins is in European thought, not indigenous to Africans. And I think we've probably answered this question before, but how would the chairman best circumvent our brothers and sisters that get caught up in semantics?
I think ultimately there are limits to where we can go with this debate of theory versus theory. That's why we say the real question is the unity of theory and practice. In the final analysis, the masses will answer these questions for us if our theory permits us or demands us, requires that we go among the masses to build actual organization. I've seen it happen in the real world, that we've seen opinions change overnight because the weight of the people in uniting with what it is that we say. They unite what we do as a reflection of what we say. That's what will happen in the real world, and that's where we're going to win it on the ground. And so some of these forces we will win through discussions such as the ones that we're having now. But the reality is the majority of them, to the extent they can be won, they'll be won because of our effectiveness in mobilizing masses of people in the direction that we're heading.
Uhuru. Morty from Richmond, Virginia asks, Uhuru, could the coronavirus pandemic create the crisis necessary to spark the next phase of revolution?
It is contributing to the next phase of revolution. And depending again on the intervention of the advanced detachment.
Yes.
It won't happen automatically, not by itself, but that's why we're having this discussion. That's what we're talking about, the regional strategy. That's what we're talking about, the absolute need for the African working class to have its own advanced detachment that provides the leadership for the masses of our people. And it will contribute to undermining the whole social system, capitalist social system. I mean, we have to explain to the people in our day-to-day work in our communities, what is this situation? First of all, the Africans don't have any power at all. We have a situation now where the United States government, you have the declaration of a national emergency. Some resources are going to be unleashed, and they will have some kind of collateral benefit to the African population, but that's all. Nothing that speaks specifically to the needs of African people whose conditions are worse than you will find, or the Mexican people whose condition, or the indigenous people whose conditions are worse than white people. Like in St. Louis County, I just mentioned, they have initiated a drive-through kind of testing. You can just drive your car through and get tested for it. But it's the county area of the St. Louis County, the African population is only 4% of the population. Who's going to look out for us?
Right.
You understand? So that's what we have to do, and we have to take an understanding against colonialism.
Yes.
It's colonialism. It's a political question that we are confronted with, a political question that denies Africans any power, any control over dealing with our own issues. And two, it is, well, that's fun. It is a question of the social system itself resting on colonialism that cannot even provide for a damn healthcare system. There is no healthcare system in this country. There is no healthcare system. There are corporations that do stuff. I mean, you know, Trump's got Walmart, and he's got certain other corporations that won't allow unions and do all kinds of other horrible things to workers to promise that they're going to provide Google, they're going to provide some kind of resources to deal with the coronavirus issue. What nonsense is that? The workers have to have control of our own economy and our own power so that we can direct, and that's what we would take to the masses of people, and that's what's going to help to escalate this whole revolutionary project we're talking about. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. Currently, there are no other questions. Did you want to say anything before we close it out?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming on and asking you again to look at some of the sources I just mentioned in terms of keeping up with the coronavirus issue. Some good stuff is out there. Not all stuff is good, but we trust the masses of people to make a judgment about what's good and what's bad, unlike Facebook and the bourgeoisie that wants to tell us what we should believe and think. And you should be hostile to that, by the way.
Yes.
And so be on the lookout for at our platforms. look at the Black is Back Coalition platform, look at other stuff that's out there that's pretty good. Even some stuff that comes from sectors of the bourgeoisie or petty bourgeoisie, you'll find with information. Though they won't give you the political clarity that you need, you'll find some things about how, hopefully, to protect ourselves from the coronavirus. But the big virus we got is imperialism, is colonial capitalism. That's the virus. That's the threat. That's the existential threat. So just want to say that. Watch our platforms to see some changes that we've made in terms of upcoming events that we and conferences that we are responsible for, and we're winning. We should not despair. Mm-hmm. Coronavirus, we should not despair. We should not panic. There is a lot of panic in this country right now. Panic won't help us. It never helps anything. So turn to the party, turn to the Uhuru movement, turn to the instruments that we have available right now and help us to build even more competent instruments to be able to respond not only to this aspect of colonial domination, but other areas as well. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, thank you, Chairman, for just that brilliant study and for all of the questions that you've answered. And we just want to let people know that because of time, we want everyone to know that if your question wasn't answered, one of our moderators will correspond with you and make sure that the chairman sees your question. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party? Visit apspuhuru.org for all information regarding how you can apply. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, the Political Report to the 7th Congress at burningspearmarketplace.com. At this time, our movement events have been either postponed or moved to online conferences. Information regarding each event and its status will be published by each respective organization and announced on this platform when we receive those updates. In the meantime, please follow closely the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to COVID-19. We are not only monitoring the situation closely, but are thinking up creative ways to keep our communities informed and protected during this imperialist-imposed crisis. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru. Uhuru.